Well, I'm really pleased to say now that I'm joined by Mark Bird from the GBGB and lots to talk about. But Mark, thank you for joining us. I'd like to start on a positive and think about what we've got to look forward to in 2023 in greyhound racing.
Well, I think there's certainly a full-packed calendar in terms of the open race scheduling this year. I personally can't remember a time when we've got more open races in there, but as importantly, Julie, the fact that the prize money on a lot of these competitions has gone up as well. And whilst myself, who chairs the open race committee, when we sit there and look at the puzzle that is how we're going to get all these competitions in, as you know, we've taken some of the Cat 1s down to 3 rounds. That's allowed more competitions to come in, which has allowed more sponsorship. And I think that's a really, really good part of the year ahead, really, in terms of just how many races we've got there. Even the fallow months, January and February, have got races in them this year. So I think that's a big one on our calendar.
So what are you most looking forward to? And that can be in terms of racing or, the job that you do. What are you most looking forward to this year?
Well, first of all, I'm looking forward to the awards. I mean, obviously, last year we ran it later because of where we were in COVID. This time, we're clear of that, so we can go back to where they normally place, which is in February. It's on the 12th of February this year. And I think, most importantly, we're moving out of London, which for me is a first. I know we've been to Manchester before, but this year we looked at particular venues that we could look at and thought, well, actually, why aren't we sticking the money into the pocket of greyhound racing again? Which is why we've ended up at Owlerton for a weekend festival, effectively, because they'll be racing on the Friday and Saturday night, and then the awards on the Sunday. So for me, I think it's a big thing, and also it'll open up the opportunity for other people from around the country to go to the awards. I really genuinely wanted to sell out this year, and I think it will. So that for me is my near highlight for now.
Lots to look forward to. What are you most fearful of this year?
Well, there's two things, I suppose, which are sort of really in the forefront of our mind. One is obviously the cost of living crisis. We've got concerns both with trainers being able to obviously look after their dogs, but they are. But how long is that going to continue for with what we've got coming on? And also owners, in terms of, again, them looking after the dogs that they own, but will they be putting their hands in their pockets and buying more dogs? And that's why I'm really pleased that the open race calendar is looking the way that it is. So for us, we're doing lots of work in making sure that trainers are okay with regards to the welfare of their dogs and they are keeping them in good health. But again, we're also looking to see what opportunities we can get in that, be that bulk buying of food and going to different racetracks so that trainers can go and get their food collectively at a discounted price, albeit where we're trying to look just to see if we can help in terms of limiting the cost on things. So the cost of living crisis is here to stay, unfortunately, for a while, and we need to do what we can around that. And I'm talking about collectively, not just the Greyhound Board. The other threat that I think we were still looking at is regards to the ban that was being proposed by, most notably, the RSPCA and Dogs Trust last year. It hasn't gone away. I think we put ourselves into a very good position, most notably for the fact that we had the new Greyhound welfare strategy, A Good Life for Every Greyhound. But we can't be complacent, and we're already aware that those charities are lobbying the Scottish Government, even though Shawfield, as we know, is closed. They're also lobbying the Welsh Assembly, the Senedd, and we haven't got a foothold in Wales either. This is obviously, as you know, the Valley, although there are ambitions to have the Valley turned into a regulated track. So we're still having to fight a campaign, both not only in this country in terms of Westminster and making sure that our own politicians give us that backing, but also in Scotland and also in Wales.
Mark, I just want to delve a little bit more into the financial situation. Obviously, across the country, it's pretty dire. How does that affect greyhound racing per se? And also, is there any movement on the levy? I know that you're constantly trying to get more money into the sport that way.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, there's less money in people's pockets. So we're waiting to see whether or not that's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of people not only gambling on greyhound racing, but also in terms of attendances at tracks. I mean, another good thing for this year is that we're seeing some of the tracks now going back to Friday and Saturday night racing, which means that obviously, hopefully, audiences can come back. Certainly the spectatorship has fallen. But where we have got racing going ahead, I mean, look at Sheffield, for example. They're bucking the trend. They're getting sellouts on a Tuesday night even, which is something we didn't see even before COVID struck. So there's some positives in there. But I think, as I've said already, because the cost of living crisis is something that's going to rumble on for a while, I think there could be a net impact on the sport in terms of just people and their leisure pound. In relation to the actual levy itself, as you know, with that strategy that came in, we're already boxing well above our weight in terms of spending money on the welfare reforms and what our ambitions are around welfare, but it will cost more. And for that to happen, we've got to make sure that the levy and the contributions from the bookmakers has increased. So we're currently going through a round of negotiations with the bookmakers as it stands. We've already had one major bookmaker turn around and say they will pay the extra levy. But obviously it's premised on the fact that everybody else follows suit. So what we're trying to do is a series of presentations with Madeline Campbell, as you know, is the author of the strategy. It's a costed strategy as well, so bookmakers will know exactly where their money's going. And as we keep saying to them, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do by the sport in terms of investment. It's the right thing to do on the back of the white paper in relation to the gambling review. Because again, there's going to be no real good news come out of that for bookmakers. So this is the right thing for them to do, and it's just a matter of trying to convince them. And they do understand it. They do understand it. It's just a question of getting it across the line.
I hear about welfare payments that you're having to make to trainers that are facing difficulties, and the welfare commitment you put out is ambitious. You must sort of feel like a bit of an accountant, constantly trying to balance the books.
Yeah, I never really came into the sport thinking I was going to be a bean counter, but it's turning into that a bit, really. And we have seen, I mean, you make about welfare payments, we have increased those substantially over the last, I won't say year, but over the last few months. And I suppose, again, one of the things that we're trying to do with Ian Foster, as the owner's rep, is to try and get that side of it much more professional. And the reason I mention this now is because most of the welfare payments are going out are for trainers who have got their contracts with their owners on a run money basis or prize money basis. What they're not doing is entering into contracts where there's a kennel bill that's going to be paid regardless. And we said this even when we went into COVID, making welfare payments there. It's totally the wrong type of business model. If dogs are winning, if dogs are racing, that's great. But the moment the card drops off or there's illness, I mean, again, a good example is if you get kennel illness, which we get every time this year, then dogs aren't running. And if they're not running, they're not earning. And that's where the GBGB are having to step in to actually make welfare payments. It's not ideal. And, we would impress on as many trainers as possible to buck that trend and go to a kennel bill basis, because this isn't going to go away for some foreseeable time.
Mark, you touched on the charities, big charities who are campaigning for a ban on greyhound racing and look to be gaining traction, certainly in Scotland and Wales. How big a threat is this to us? Because in terms of our media, it seems to have gone away a little bit, but certainly not as far as you're concerned.
No, I think there's not a week goes by when we get some snippet of information as to what the charities are trying to do, be it through the press or be it through radio stations. I've lost count of how many radio interviews I've given over the last few weeks with regional elements of, say, the BBC or independent broadcasters. And what they're trying to say is that the sport is inherently cruel, and for that reason it should stop. And we making an awful amount of a big deal about the fact that obviously the report that they did on the back of what we did around the welfare strategy was going to be the thing that decided whether or not they were going to continue to support greyhound racing or not. No one's actually seen that report other than, I think, a few ministers within government and perhaps a few other people like the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Senate. They haven't even shared it, as we understand it, with some of their trustees in those charities. And so the question's got to be, well, why is that? Because we maintain that greyhound racing is anything but cruel and abhorrent. You look at what we've done over the last few years, especially, but what you talk about our ambition around welfare as well, what that wants to be, I think is completely perverse that the charities are doing this. And they're doing it at a time when, as you know, there's a real crisis within homing, not only for greyhounds, but also for other breeds and other animals as well. So why would they talk about, okay, they're talking about a phased ban over 5 years? It will not work. It just would not stand to reason. If the government turned around today and said there's going to be a ban in 5 years' time, you, me, and probably everybody else would just walk out, because why would you hang around for 5 years and see the demise of the sport? So we think it's folly on their part. But what they haven't done is they haven't shared what they said was going to be an evidential basis for them to change their minds. And yet we've provided an evidential strategy for the betterment of the sport, and certainly for the betterment of our racing greyhounds. But you said right at the start of this, these are big charities and they've got deep pockets. And they will be lobbying MPs. They'll be lobbying not just, as I said, Scotland and Wales. They'll also be lobbying perhaps future governments, because I think the next general election we may well see a change of government, So we've got to be doing exactly the same. We've got to be lobbying both the current government, but also potentially the Labour Party or a coalition for that matter. So the one thing I suppose which is detrimental to that is it's taking our time as well. And as I keep reminding people, the Greyhound board, in terms of how many people we are 30, not 150 or whatever other people think. And the board is a stakeholder board, and again, they've got day jobs as well, most of them. So it's a big ask, but it's something that we have to do because we cannot allow this threat to continue.
Well, Mark, there's been plenty of coverage recently about issues at tracks, and I'm not going to single any out because it is more than one. Certainly, from photographic evidence I've seen and some races I've seen, there is a welfare issue there. I know that many trainers feel the same. Calls for the GBGB to do more. What would it take for you to step in?
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, I've had lots of emails telling me that we should be suspending licenses for tracks for different reasons. And to be fair, they're always on the grounds of welfare. And of course, here we are saying that welfare is at the centre of everything we do. So, we don't take that lightly. But of course, we also need to look at what rules there exist and what we can apply to tracks if, for example, they weren't doing anything. But that's part of the point, though, Julie. These tracks know they've got problems, and invariably they are trying to sort out what those problems are, and it isn't something that can be turned around in 5 minutes. We've, as you know, over the years, we've got people like Mark Peacock, who's the track liaison officer, who's come in, who started looking at the way in which tracks are maintained and they're prepared, and we've had some really good results with that. But there are always going to be other things, be it hair, trap, or otherwise, that are going to be exponents of failure. And I'm pleased to say that invariably, with what's happened in recent weeks, there's been no serious injuries of animals. But we don't want that, and that could happen in the future. So we are trying to work hand in hand with those particular tracks that are experiencing problems. And if it isn't now, it will be in the summer when we start getting the hot weather again, or it will be back in the winter of next year. So I understand everybody's concerns about what the GBGB should or shouldn't be doing, but you also need to rest assured that we are, where we can, we're trying to work with the tracks to make sure that those problems, whatever they be, go away.
I think JK wrote a Monday column where he said he sort of questions if tracks are actually independently regulated at all, he said, or just choose what should be overseen. What would your response to that be?
Well, we're having this chat at Regulatory Board later this month, in fact, next week, I think it is, about whether there is a particular issue with the track, and say it's the running surface. We use that as an example. There's a running surface problem. We would want to know what the track are trying to do to remedy that. And of course, it might not be the track in any case. It may be other problems, but the track is the feature because that's perhaps where the dogs are being injured. So we want to know more about what the track are doing. Obviously, we've got specialist advice and assistance that we can provide them as well. But I think the key question for the Regulatory Board is, at the moment, the track decides as to when they can start racing again, and not the GBGB. And maybe that slight change should happen. Even it's just going to be a question of saying, what help have you got? What have you done? And for one of our staff to turn around and say, yeah, that seems acceptable, so therefore we'll run again. Whether or not that's something the Regulatory Board want to pursue remains to be seen. And of course, we'll take that under advisement from people like Ian Foster and Peter Harnden as the owners and trainers rep, respectively, because I think they have a big part to play in that as well.
Do you think there's a case to be made for having an independent steward at greyhound tracks? I think like there is at horse race tracks, and perhaps even at every meeting. I mean, I know money is tight, but in terms of money coming in from media rights, there is money there, perhaps.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by the level of independence, because obviously with horse racing, for example, they've got their own track stewards, but obviously they're still BHA stewards. It's just that they have a fundamental look at that. Don't forget what we have got coming in later this year, the regional veterinary stewards that are going to be coming in. Now, okay, they're not going to be experts in tracks, but what they are going to be expert obviously is looking at injuries within racing greyhounds, elements of lameness if before they race and after they race as well. So I think that will have an impact. Whether or not we go as far as to say that there should be individual stewards attributed to the track running surface, all the infrastructure is not just about the tracks, it's also about the hair rail and many other things as well. But I think we are starting to see that change, where I think most people involved with greyhound racing want the GBGB to have more teeth.
Well, Mark, there's been quite a big turnover of staff at the GBGB, certainly in recent months. So I wonder if you could put your finger on why and tell us if you're worried.
I'll answer that in reverse. Yes, I'm a little worried because we're losing some very experienced staff. I'd like to say in all cases they're going on to perhaps bigger and better things. They've done their time with the GB board. All of them have done a considerable amount of time with the ground board and have now gone to other parts. I like to think that we've still got a little bit of influence with them because they're not leaving the sport. That's one good thing. They're staying within greyhound racing, so they'll have one foot in a different camp. That's all. But in terms of professional working relationships, they will still exist, and I hope will continue the way that they are. We are having a trouble with recruitment. The eastern start, or central start that we've been trying to get hold of for some considerable months now, hasn't filled. We're hoping that will fill sometime very soon, but I think it's indicative of where the jobs in the marketplace is at the moment, with not just greyhound racing, but in sport, but also wider than that. People are reviewing what they want to do with their careers in life, especially since COVID, and I think are in some cases wanting to do something different rather than what they've always known. So I don't see it as any slight on the GBGB that we're struggling with retention and recruitment, because that's happening everywhere. What we need to make sure is that we've still got sufficient feet on the ground that obviously can go out there and regulate and look after and support tracks and trainers and owners in the way that they're doing now.
That said, I can't imagine it's overly easy to work for the Greyhound board. You must feel sometimes just like battening down the hatches and hiding away.
Well, everyone's got to have a sense of targeting someone or other, and it tends to be us. But I don't think it's any different with the BHA. For me and my staff, I think it's just that there are so few of us, and there isn't a single member of staff that when we start seeing stuff on, especially Twitter, we know how acidic that can be. But when we start seeing things, and things are put at our feet, which are either inappropriate or then it just shouldn't be there, because obviously my staff are working incredibly hard to make sure that they're doing their job. I don't think there's laughably, when we talk about there being 35 hours in a week, I don't think any of our field staff, certainly, and a lot of our office staff, are working anywhere near that. They're well in advance of all of that, and that's because they're very passionate about what they do, whether they're greyhound people or they're not. They want to make a difference, and they want to see things improve in the sport. So yeah, it's slings and arrows, and I think for some of us we've got harder skin than others, but yeah, people do take it to heart.
I think one of the key positions and members of staff that you're losing, albeit staying in the sport, like you said, is Paul Illingworth. Any thoughts on who might replace him, or it's a job you have to fill, really, isn't it?
It's certainly a critical post from our point of we've got a meeting later this week, because Paul won't be going until March, but that will come very, very quickly. So we need to make sure that we've got someone in place for when Paul leaves. There's a few irons in the fire in terms of as to who that might be and what they might be doing. But of course, it's also given us a potential opportunity to start doing things a little bit more different than what we're doing at the moment. With a change in staff, there's always going to be opportunities there as well. So we're actively going through those. So fingers crossed we'll be able to announce something in the next few weeks as to who's going to replace Paul. And we wish him well, because he's spent an awful lot of time at the GBGB, and as you know, he's got greyhound through and through in his veins, and I think he'll do a really good job at Entain. So yeah, onwards and upwards.
Well, Mark, we touched on it in the introduction. 2023 open race calendar is very exciting. I think everybody appreciated the early release as well. So well done on that. Lots to look forward to.
As I said in the introduction, I think certainly in my time, this is the most competitions that we've had on the calendar, not just in terms of volume, but also in terms of what they're attracting, both in terms of Cat 1s and also in relation to the prize money as well, which I think is welcomed by lots of people. And anecdotally, we've got quite a bit of evidence to say that people are going out there and buying dogs to fill those competitions, because, as you said, we managed to get, rather than what we have done previously, we just get the first quarter out and then follow it on afterwards. We managed to get it out pretty much all in one go, which I think for potential owners who are looking at where they're going to buy their dogs and for what competitions, now they've got it spread over the 12 months. So I'm grateful for everybody, both track level, but also my own staff for getting that done in the time that they did.
It's been very helpful for planning television programs as well. So thank you for that.
Sure.
When Sky coverage ended, I remember a lot of people saying, you have to look after the top end of the sport, and that in turn will look after the grassroots. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's I was going to quote Liz Truss about a trickle down, but I probably want to keep away from that. But there is some truth to that in greyhound racing, and so much as if you've got the top end sorted, everything else will follow. I still think on the graded side, starting to see less in the way of the morning racing, but later into the day, into the time when you've got the nighttime economy as well. That will be something that will be much welcomed as well, because as I said earlier, where there is footfall, we've actually seen quite a bounce back on that, and Sheffield, Yarmouth will all prove testament to that. So I think it's just a question of trying to get the tracks through their media deals, of which obviously we have no control, but trying to get some influence on that to get more, certainly nighttime racing, but even better Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays.
You are more tightly regulating the competitions, though, and therefore there are going to be sort of limited 4-round competitions. First of all, do you still think that's the right decision? And secondly, how do you feel about tracks kind of finding their own way around it?
Do I think that's the right sort of decision? It was the right decision to make on the basis that we wanted to fill the calendar. And the only way we could really do that was by limiting it to, in most cases, to 3 rounds. Have we got it right? I don't know. And we did say right from the outset from this is that we would trial it for 2023. So I think once we're past the Derby, obviously, which features large within the calendar, once we're past the Derby, we'll have a better idea as to whether or not it's going to work or not. I know what some of the tracks are thinking, that, but in fact, most tracks would want 4 rounds just because it's better coverage for them. But you've got to also keep that in context that last year there were lots of competitions that just didn't fill for whatever reason. So you ended up having less, well, not so much the heats, but certainly less competitors within those races. So I stand by what we've done because I think it's the right thing to do. Whether or not it's going to be for the betterment of the sport, we'll see later on this year. But I think it's a great thing to have that amount of competitions at that level with that levels of prize money for 2023.
Well, Mark, I want to talk to you now about the homing situation and start by getting a general overall view as to where we're at with it, because I certainly hear concerns from trainers and owners alike. What's your assessment?
Well, I go back to we're in a cost of living crisis. We're also past COVID, thankfully. So the idea that greyhounds were flying out the door, which they quite literally were when we were in lockdown, with people taking more dogs, sadly is finished in that respect. So there has been a slowing down. I think if you speak to the animal welfare charities, the ones that we are still speaking to, people like Battersea, etc., they are suffering exactly the same. In fact, they're suffering it worse because they're getting a lot of dogs boomerang back to them. And whilst we've had a small amount of instances like that, the vast majorities of greyhounds that went out during the COVID pandemic are still out there, still as family pets. But we have seen a slowing down. I've certainly been contacted by a number of homing centres trying to see what help we can provide them. And that includes the Greyhound Trust, of which we have a meeting with in a couple of weeks' time. We set about trying to identify other homing centres which we hadn't normally used, and sort of Pearl of Beniston, who's, as you know, our GRS coordinator. She went through the Association of Cats and Dogs Home, went through the membership, found some more kennels or homing centres that weren't necessarily taking greyhounds, and approached those. And we've had about a 20% uptake on that, which is 20% that wasn't there beforehand. It also seems that in the last 2 months of last year, there was an increase in the amount of dogs that were going in as well. But let's not forget, this is still an issue because, as we know, if they're in trainers' kennels as retired dogs, as in they're not racing anymore, that could effectively be a bed blocker for another racer coming in, which impacts on the amount of 3, 4, 5 dog races that we've got going on as well. So it's in nobody's interests to have those dogs in trainers' kennels. And, it is something that we, as best we can, will try to remedy. But there's no easy solution to this, unfortunately, Julie. It's one of those things that is affecting homing centres across the board, and we will have to try and do what we can around it. But make no mistake, it is about still trying to present greyhounds as a great pet, as a family member.
And that's one thing that I would say, is that the bond, I will never say anything bad about it. I think it's a brilliant thing, but it doesn't buy homes. And ultimately, you have greyhounds, I have a greyhound. It's about spreading awareness still. And we've been saying it for so many years, but you still get the questions in the street, surprised at what lovely dogs they are.
I only went into a pet store the other day to see 2 Greyhound Trust people there with their greyhound, and I kid you not, I don't need to embellish this, but the first question was, don't they make good pets? And you think, Yes, they do. We all know they make great pets, but it's still getting around that, because it is a fallacy with the dog that they are something that they're not, and you and I and other people know that they're all couch potatoes, all said and done. But it is something, again, under the strategy we're looking to promote as best we can, and that's another area that there isn't funding for at the moment, but there will be funding in the future. I've got no doubt about that.
Well, Mark, sad news just before Christmas that we lost a greyhound racing great, I think it's fair to call him, Maurice Newman, and not just great in greyhound racing, to be fair, a wonderful, wonderful man. I know that you had many dealings with him. I just wanted to sort of take a moment to pay tribute to him, and what a big loss he will be from the sport.
Maurice is one of those characters. I think I've referred to him as the elder statesman within greyhound racing, but and I think I probably have my ear bent in a negative way, almost as much as in a positive way from Maurice over the years. Telling he's not alone in this, but he was certainly one to tell me how to do my job. But the difference with Maurice, he did it in such a nice way. I never took offence to it, and it's not lost on me that his funeral coincides with Pele's funeral as well. So it's if Maurice could have orchestrated that, yeah, he probably would have done. And I'm just upset that I couldn't be there today to pay my respects in person, but Paul Illingworth was representing us instead.
And so good that he received the award from the GBGB before his passing. I hope he knows how highly thought of he was.
Well, it was actually the GWA award, but we were more than happy to have that at the GBGB awards. And even at that meeting, he bent my ear over several things. And I remember going to the golf day that he had back in September, I think it was last year. And it was always good to see Maurice holding court, and that's what he did. I can't remember the last time he probably played a round of golf, if he ever did. But and some of the stories that have emanated after his passing, I think, have been great, and it's part of sort of greyhound history lost, really, in that respect. But and of course, it wasn't just greyhounds. Obviously, his other main passion was boxing, and also being a scout in relation to football as well. So he lived the full life, and he'll be sadly missed.
Thank you for talking to us today, Mark, and for answering all my questions so honestly. I wanted to just see what your wishes are for 2023. They don't have to be realistic. We can all dream. What would you want to see for the year ahead for greyhound racing?
Well, I'd certainly like to see what I've always wanted since I've sort of been in charge of running the GBGB, or supposedly running the GBGB, and that is about having a united sport. I still think there are factions out there that despite what their intentions are putting the sport down rather than actually unifying the sport and taking it forward. I think we do need more money in the sport. I'd love to see it go back to some of where it was in its halcyon days in terms of footfall, spectator numbers. And I think that's all of that is doable. It's not unrealistic. It's just a question of having the right environment that people want to go along to watch greyhound racing, as much as they want to go and have an experience in terms of their evening pursuits or whatever it is they're doing. So I think all of that is achievable. I suppose what I'd really like to see also is the film made of Mickey's Barrett after what a sensational year that Jason Gray, the connections, the syndicate had with that dog. I mean, it is literally the thing that stories are made of, and I think we are blessed to have seen Mickey's Barrett run, including last week when he ran the All England Cup as well. So there's lots to be positive about, and I want people, if they can, to focus on some of that, because I know, go back to JK's comment, he sort of said sometimes we're too focused on it being positive, but I'm an optimist first and a pessimist second. So I think there's lots of positive notes in 2023, and for me, if we get to the end of it and we've had a full open race calendar season, we've had the money in from the bookmakers, and we've got a bigger footfall, then I think that would be job done.
And for you personally, we've touched on this interview about how you get a lot of backlash at times. It can be, I'm sure, a tough job to do, even if you do have thick skin. Are you here to stay?
I think so. No one's telling me differently. I tend to. It's about results at the end of the day, and I've always said I wanted to put welfare where it should be in terms of this sport, and I think we're very much getting there now. And I also want the additional money into the sport, and ultimately, I'd like to see the sport prosper, because it deserves to, in terms of, especially with all the groundwork that we've put into place. So, no one's telling me that I'm going yet, Julie, but we shall see. But I'm here for 2023.
Excellent. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I'm sure the viewers will enjoy hearing from you, and I hope some of your New Year wishes come true.
Thank you.